Not those. I ordered.
You're getting ripped off wherever you were.
That's what I think.
But I think I ordered like 50 or 100.
I figured you need one
The
for a few
Medical
years.
Society is selling N
I'll see you in 5 seconds. Thank you.
We'll call the meeting to order. Will you stand for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any additions, deletions, changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Public comments?
We have to do the swearing in.
Okay. Town attorney?
Actually, if I could have everyone stand. Everyone on the board, sorry. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution and government of the United States and the state of Florida, and that I am duly qualified to sit on the Planning and Zoning Board for the town of Juno Beach under the laws or ordinances of the state of Florida, of the town of Juno Beach, and that I will well and faithfully perform the duties of Planning and Zoning Board member for which I am about to enter. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If I could have everybody just look this way, please. Thank you. One more. Thank you very much.
Public comments?
I did not receive any.
Town attorney?
Oh, okay, moving right along. Time to select a new chairperson. So we'll do it the same way we do town council. Anybody can nominate. Nominations do not require a second, and you can decline if you are nominated. So we'll go ahead and open it up for nominations for the position of chair.
I'd like to nominate Michael Stern as chair to continue the tradition of the last 5 years that I've been on the board. Michael's done a great job, and I'd like to continue to see him do this for the next year.
Thank you, Paul.
Do you accept, Mr. Stern?
Yes, I do.
Other nominations for chair?
I guess I would say that I heard at the last council meeting, the proposal that it's not a bad idea to be rotating people in top positions. And it has nothing to do with the quality of the service of the person who's been in the role, rather it's just a good idea to have some rotation of responsibilities. Given that, although Michael's done a very fine job, I guess I would nominate Paul.
Mr. Shea, do you accept?
No.
Okay, Mr. Shea declines. Any other nominations?
I'd like to make a comment. I think what Jim just said is very pertinent. Leadership is a great thing. I think our chairperson has done a great job over the last 5 years, but to have rotation and new thoughts coming through the organization is pertinent, and it allows people to rethink its vision and its purpose. And I would just restate, I think it has merit in what you're saying. Thank you.
Any other nominations?
I just want to make my comment.
That's fair. Okay, nominations closed. Mr. Stern is again the chair. Do you want me to do vice chair, or do you want to take over, Mr. Stern? Chair Stern.
I'll take over.
All right, go ahead.
We'll open
It's all yours.
nominations for vice chair.
I would like to nominate Paul Shea.
I would accept.
Thank you.
I have a nomination for vice chair. I think Jim Ferguson has demonstrated in his tenure here, short tenure, a number of examples of leadership, thoughtfulness, and good balance and consideration on a number of subject matters that we've dealt with. And I would like to nominate Jim Ferguson for vice chair.
All right. Does he accept?
I guess I thank you very much for the proposal. Actually, I think Paul has also done a fine job. If we're not rotating chair and vice chair, I guess I would say stick with Paul as vice chair. Thank you.
All in favor of Paul Shea?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Congratulations, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, now we'll move on to the fascinating topic of the Sunshine Law, which, considering we have the same board, now we're really getting repetitious. But we'll do it again. Chapter 286, Florida statutes, government sunshine law. It's something that's pretty unique to the state of Florida. You know, some might say maybe it hinders government more than it helps, but it is the law that we operate under, and we must comply with it. So when does it apply? It applies to a gathering of 2 or more members of the same board to discuss anything that may reasonably, or actually foreseeably is what the wording is, come before that board for action. So anything you think might, may, has a chance of coming before the board for official action, you should not discuss with another board member. And of course, it applies to advisory boards as well as the town council. There's 3 components. One is the public. Meetings have to be open to the public, which is interesting in this, the arena we're operating in right now with COVID-19 and everything else. You know, there's been some leeway to do that virtually instead of in person, but they still must be open to the public in some form. Notice must be given, which is essentially a clerk function, and minutes must be taken, which is also essentially a clerk function. And as far as minutes, different cities, different municipalities treat it differently. Some do very action minutes, just what was done. Some give a little more detail. It really depends on the board and the municipality and how they view minutes. So basically, the gist of the Sunshine Law is that all conversations about board business must occur during the course of the public hearing. So you cannot, in any form, in any manner, have a conversation about something that might become before this board for action. It applies to written, texts, emails, any mode of communication that you can come up with, it applies to. It's not violated if it's just a one-way. Sometimes one board member, I wouldn't advise it, but it happens sometimes a board member might send out an email or well, that's how it usually happens, is usually by email, or a board member will send it, it'll go to all the rest of you as board members. The Sunshine Law is not violated until you respond. So if the communication is just one way, there's no Sunshine Law violation. Generally, if you're not going to be here, which is when it usually happens, the better practice would be to send your comments to Caitlin and have her read them in if that's what you want, or have the chair read your comments if you cannot attend a meeting personally and you can't participate in either way. So this also, the other time this occurs, and it occurs all the time, and is before the meeting. There's a temptation to talk about things that are coming up. Resist that temptation. After the meeting, sometimes once it's done, but sometimes you never know when these things will come back. I would not really talk about after the meeting either, but that's a little less worrisome. Also, private conversations on the dais. You know, you might be discussing the weather, you might be discussing, you can't hear whoever's speaking, but everything you say at the meeting should be on mic, not off mic. So the public has a right to hear that everything that you say at the meeting. You can socialize together, you can attend functions together, just don't discuss board business when you're together. You can, of course, come to the council meetings, as many of you do, and comment on items there. That's fine. Those are publicly noticed meetings. Just don't discuss them privately among or between yourselves. You're always able to speak with town staff, with the clerk, with the manager, with me, with Frank. That's never a violation of the Sunshine Law. The only time that becomes an issue is if the person you're speaking to becomes an intermediary and shares that with another board member. So you can always talk to staff. We're careful not to share the views of one board member with another board member. Inspection trips, site visits, if you're going to do it, don't do it together. Again, temptation to speak about things. Especially, a lot of times you'll want to take a site visit now that the board does recommendations on variances. If there's a variance, there's a temptation possibly to go see what the subject is, and that's fine. You'll have to disclose it as an ex parte communication, separate issue. But don't go together, go by yourself. Let's see, what else haven't we covered? Oh, abstaining, and this hasn't come up much. You cannot, the statute says you cannot abstain unless you have an apparent voting conflict. So unless there's at least an appearance that you might have a voting conflict, just because you might know the person when there's no familial business or other type of relationship, you must vote. It's only in when there's an actual conflict that you cannot vote. You're required to under the law. There's very severe penalties for Sunshine Law violation. There can be criminal penalties, civil penalties, attorney's fees. Any action that the board takes in violation of the Sunshine Law is invalid. So ex parte communications is the other thing I generally cover under here. Anytime you're considering anything that's quasi-judicial, which is essentially your site plans, your PUDs, your variances, anytime you're taking an application and applying it to the rules that are set forth in the town code, it's quasi-judicial. If you have communications outside the course of the public hearing, you're required to disclose those under ex parte communications. The theory is that you're supposed to legally base your decision on what occurs during the course of the public hearing. And if you've acquired knowledge outside of the course of the public hearing, outside of what's presented by staff, members of the public, the applicant, you need to disclose that so the other parties to the proceeding know that you've acquired knowledge from another source and they can actually question you on that knowledge that you've gained. And that, ex parte can be written, it can be oral, and it includes site visits. So if you have a variance and you've gone to visit the site, you should disclose that you've gone to visit the site. And if one of the parties wants to question you or follow up on that visit, they're entitled to do so. And so if you have an ex parte communication that isn't disclosed, it's presumptively prejudicial. So that's why at the start or before the item, we actually disclose the ex parte communications. So I went through it kind of fast because I've done it about, some of you have heard it about 5 times. But if there's any questions that you want to address or any issues or any circumstances, now is your chance.
I got one, Len.
Yes, sir.
On the bottom of page 2,
Yes, sir.
it says that council members may distribute a position statement
Right.
to other council members, so long as they avoid a discussion or debate.
Right.
Seems kind of odd that you could
Well,
send out a position statement.
I agree. And that was a Attorney General opinion. I can't remember the exact facts of that were, but the question was, I think it's more like it happened, and that's what I'm saying. If you want to express your position on an item and you're going to be here, do it at the meeting. If you're not going to be here, send it to Caitlin and it can be distributed. I believe it was a advisory opinion based on something that had occurred, and the Attorney General concluded, well, because there was no response and it was just one way, it was not a violation of the Sunshine Law. So that's that one-way versus two-way distinction.
So it's really if you're going to miss the meeting and you'd like to give some input, and so we would send that to Caitlin.
Send it to Caitlin and she'll either read it or have the chair will read it or whatever the case might be. I know you all can't be here all the time. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. Now, Frank, you're up.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board. So the next item is the annual review of the Planning and Zoning Board duties and responsibilities. And as you can see in the backup material, you have Code Section 3428, which indicates that the Planning and Zoning Board shall issue recommendations to the Town Council and the Planning and Zoning Board of Adjustments and Appeals. as applicable for community planning and the comprehensive plan, site plan, appearance review, preliminary plat reviews, variances, administrative appeals, and special exception uses. But now, Chapter 20-24 also indicates that the duties of the Planning and Zoning Board shall be assigned from time to time by the town council. So the town council can always indicate if if they want you to do something outside of what I just read. And one of my comments from staff was going to be that that's actually just something that just happened. At Wednesday's town council meeting, town council was discussing the recreational area behind us, which normally per your duties wouldn't come to you, but now they have deemed it necessary for you to review that. So that's something that's going to be coming hopefully on the next Planning and Zoning Board meeting or the next one. We just have to wait on the rendering from the landscape architect before that comes before you. But that is a good example of something that's not in your duties, black and white. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Guess I have a question. Following up on that very matter that may come up at the next meeting. I believe it was Councilor Wheeler who said at the council meeting that it would be very helpful if we were going to be looking at a plan like that to have something marked off outside so you could actually see where it was going to be, because it is a little bit difficult to visualize with some of the documents that they've been submitting. Might that be possible at the next meeting to have that marked off so that we could go out there during the meeting and take a look at it together?
From my recollection, that was not the consensus. They were talking about doing a survey as well that would show you exactly where it would go.
Right.
And I believe council didn't decide to go that way. But we would need that survey to actually plat it the right way. But that's something that we can bring up, definitely.
All right. If you think it might be helpful to see it without a formal survey, just to get a notion, because again, looking at the overhead views, it was very difficult to get a sense of gradations out there.
Yes.
Once
Once we get the rendering from the landscape architect, that I'll bring that up to senior staff and then we'll reach out that
I
way.
understand it may not be possible. If it is, it could be
Correct.
helpful.
Understood. Thank you.
There's one item on here, it says that we should meet twice a month. How do we get around that?
Well, it also states that the town manager can cancel one of those meetings.
It says he can cancel it. Does he cancel it?
Well, right now, we're running at one meeting at a time. The last two meetings were canceled because of the pandemic.
Maybe we should change that to once a month.
Len?
We could, next time we do next time
it comes up.
yeah, or next time we're doing a revision of this section. It would not be a bad idea.
Thank you.
This time I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes, of March 2nd.
I make a motion to approve the minutes for March 2nd, Planning and Zoning 2020.
Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
second it.
It's unanimous.
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Comments from the staff.
Yeah, comments from staff?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to remind everybody that the next Planning and Zoning Board meeting is July 6th at 5:30. The town's goal-setting workshop is this Wednesday at 4 p.m. As you can see, there will be limited seating, but it will be live on YouTube as well. Next town council meeting is June 24th, and the town center will be closed on Friday, July 3rd, in observance of Independence Day. And I have an update on the comp plan. The comp plan was approved by DEO earlier today. So that's going to go to town council for second reading at the end of, at the June town council meeting. So they provided us a report with objections, recommendations. We responded to that report, they reviewed it, and they said, make it official. So I'm happy to say that we're this close to being done. That's it. Thank you.
Frank, question for you.
Yes, sir.
Looking ahead beyond the second reading itself,
Mhm.
should we not be anticipating a schedule of meetings to consider revisions in that plan? And from what I understand, if I'm correct, it's up to council to set such a schedule and to identify what our role would be as planning and zoning.
That is correct.
And would you and town staff be making a recommendation to council to create such a schedule at that meeting?
Staff has been discussing that actually today, in fact. It's something that we brought up to the town manager, and I believe that that will be discussed, not sure in the goal-setting workshop, but surely in a future meeting.
Good. It seems that there's quite a lot of work to do in terms of looking for possible revisions, and it would be a good idea to set a schedule out, I would have thought, ahead of time, so that we know where we're going over the next year.
Right, yes, and then, again, that was the discussion that we had today. The discussion was more into staff does not want to piecemeal the comprehensive plan as it hasn't been fully reviewed and looked at in decades, more than likely. So we want to look at it in a whole, as a whole. So, it's something, again, that we'll bring up to the town manager, and the town manager will make a recommendation.
Just wonder, could you clarify that a little bit?
Oh,
I would
it's-
think it's such a big document. How do you
Well,
discuss it as
there's-
a whole, as opposed to by chapters?
Well, a professional should be looking at this. And by a professional, I don't mean myself. It should be a planning professional that actually does comprehensive plan as their everyday job. As mentioned, the comprehensive plan hasn't been looked as a complete document in 15, 20 years. So what that professional would do is review the comprehensive plan as, every single element, and then they would bring recommendations. They would do charrettes, they would do studies. It's a very big undertaking, and again, we don't want to do element by element, because one element might, interfere with a different one. So that's why you have to look at it as an entire document.
Okay, I understand.
Sure.
Thanks.
So,
Chair.
to follow up on that, so the schedule, there is no schedule for submitting proposed changes or additions? That's a council decision?
After we're done with the second hearing, council can request staff to look at a specific, at any time. That's why we were working so hard to actually do this, to get this resolved for the past year and a half.
And at the second hearing, is council just reviewing those added items from the state, or are they looking at the whole document?
No, it's the second reading of what we already saw. So there is no changes other than the comments made by the state.
Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Frank, presumably staff will have something in the budget to cover the costs of hiring said professionals and running said charrettes and et cetera?
That would be up to council to
That would be
decide
up to
that,
council.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Yes, but we are starting on budget season.
Great.
Yeah, so we'll be discussing that over the next 2 to 3 meetings.
Can I ask a project question? With the proposed development, I guess it's called Ocean One, is that to the south of here? Am I
Yes,
thinking
that-
of the correct property? Is that going to come before P and Z?
Yes, that's a site plan. They haven't asked for a variance or any other applications other than the platting of the property, which planning and zoning reviews, and also the site plan, which planning and zoning reviews as well.
Okay, and one other aspect. In the weekly activity report, there's a lot of good information there, not just about planning and zoning that's very informative, but about all the departments. And I would like to see that weekly activity report linked on the website somewhere so that people can have a good, solid look at it. I had inquired, I think it was back in January, can that document be shared widely and made, people aren't aware of it. I talked to my neighbors and people aren't aware that the activity report or the police blurb exist. And I think those are really important for people to have easy access to. And, with Unicode's help, I'd like to see that, at least the activity report posted somewhere on the website. Is that possible?
Again, I can bring it up to the town manager,
Yeah.
but just to give you a history on the activity report, it was supposed to be an internal report given to council and the board, but because it is a public document, it's available for public, as a public's records request. So that's why we share it with our residents, but I can definitely bring it up to the town manager.
Because there's a lot in there, and I don't think it's, privileged information or anything proprietary that people, shouldn't be allowed to see or be made to pay for. I think that should be free and easy access.
It's free. We do not charge when we send that out
So
via
if some,
email.
no, but if somebody requests that aren't public information requests, a paid request?
If it takes less than 15 minutes to do the work, we do not charge them. So in this case, Karen and Caitlin, they have a list.
Okay.
They just add people in there, and when you get it, town council gets it, everybody gets it in an email blast.
Yeah, one of the challenges, though, people aren't even aware of it. So I think it needs some publicity, because how do people know to ask for something they don't know exists? So I think that's one of the
understand.
challenges I've found from talking to people, so.
I'll bring that up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caitlin, you-
We do have a public comment on the floor. I don't know if you want to open public comments again.
we can do that. It's limited to 3 minutes.
Councilmember Wheeler.
I want to first congratulate everybody on their renominations and congratulate our Chair Stern and Vice Chair Shea. I want to just clarify something that Frank said. I am not in favor of getting a survey. That's just going to cost the town more money. I am in favor of having it staked out, which is something I think Mr. Dinsmore, who is working on the design, can work with staff on. I think it's just beneficial because of the amount of space that these tiered sections are going to take. And I think it would benefit everyone, all of us, council and planning and zoning. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Comments from the board? I have a comment. Caitlin, I would. Yes.
May I speak?
Yes.
Stuart Katz, 450 Ocean Drive. I too would like to congratulate the board on expressing a desire to service the community and put your own time forward and to help us out. So I strongly favor public service. I strongly favor members of our community helping out in any way that they can. So certainly I have a debt of gratitude to the Planning and Zoning Board. I served on the Planning and Zoning Board for a year before I was on town council. And in this context, I distinctly remember we went through the comprehensive plan chapter by chapter. And the problem that I have is that it's a multi-chapter document. Some of these chapters were reviewed by me and by the members of the board at that time, and they're not fresh in anybody's mind. And as you know, this is a huge document. So I charge the Planning and Zoning Board to do what I would charge the town council to do. We have an opportunity now to amend our comprehensive plan in other ways than just the state mandated red line version that was presented to Planning and Zoning the last go round. I personally will request the mock-up of the comprehensive plan, because I think to get that at the last second is not sufficient for us to go through it. And I would ask you to do the same thing. If there are areas in the comp plan that you feel could be constructively amended, I would like to know about that in advance of the presentation to the next council meeting. I would charge the board this year to take an active role, and rather than just rubber stamp things that are presented to you, I really want to hear your input, please. Thanks.
We'll proceed with comments from the board. Caitlin, thank you for sending that list of town events with the last email you sent. I think that's where I saw it, and I'd ask you to continue it if you wouldn't mind to keep updating it rather than have to go to the website and look, because we don't know when it could change. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yes,
If we have more comments?
yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
Number one, I'd like to particularly say thank you to the chief and his senior team, particularly what's going on right now in our nation, in making sure that the citizens in Juno Beach and the surrounding area, coordinating what's going on, particularly in life safety events. And my wife and I are really, very pleased that they are doing their due diligence. So again, thank you. I'd also have an observation. At the last council meeting, there was an hour and a half spent about the event space. And I found it awkward why the discussion about spending $240,000 for an event space was not brought to planning and zoning. And I don't know the reason why it wasn't brought to planning and zoning to be discussed. And Mike, I'd like to present it to you. Why wasn't it discussed?
I was asked by Jim to look it over, and I did look it over and discussed it with Jim. So I did put in my input that way. You should also be able to put in your input to your town council person.
Anybody else have any comment about the spending the monies?
No, I don't.
I think one thing about spending the monies, I think it was said at the town council meeting that we're tone deaf, that we're talking about an event space during a coronavirus event, that we might not have any more events outside.
Well, I would just tell you that as I drove around the North Palm Beach area, I looked at North Palm Beach, and on Prosperity Road, they had a very interesting sign and said, here's where your 1% money is going. They were repairing their roads there. And they were very proud to say that we're using this money to repair the roads. And I looked at it and I said, but there's a good way to tell the people what they're doing. And I thought it was very informative. I thought it was very thoughtful that the town was making a statement that they are putting their monies into something that would be beneficial to all. And I'm not here to debate whether we need an event space. I have my own opinion about it, but that's for the council to think of. But why did they come to a formal discussion with planning and zoning before it spent an hour and a half with the council?
I think that's also, the town council can decide that they would like the planning and zoning group to look at something.
So
So
that-
it's really
It's
up
not
to
on our
them.
agenda.
Right, because it wasn't a formal site plan, it's a public improvement, and so the town's own improvements don't generally go through the site plan process. So again, as was said, it's really up to the council if they want the board to review it or not.
Enough on my comment. My second comment is on, Frank, and this is directed to you, please, is in reference to Florida Power and Light. For the last 6 months, we have been, and the police department has been spending many hours dealing with the expense of putting in new poles. And I'm sure before this project took place, where the new poles were going in, I'm sure they gave you a directive of what the new poles were going to go in, where they're going to go in, and where the old poles were going out. And Celestial Way, where I live, has been done, and the new poles went in. And the old poles, in many cases, there's 3 and 4 poles that are still sitting there. And I'd like to know when the old poles are going to go away. And what is the schedule that Florida Power and Light gave you? So can we just discuss generically, what is the schedule to take those old poles away for the town of Juno Beach?
The poles that you're referencing on Celestial Way, those are actually shared between FPL and other utilities. So FPL, what they do, and they do this all over the state. I actually, when we first spoke about this, I actually went to Boynton Beach, that's where I'm from. And I actually saw them there. What they do is that they take off their lines, they put in their new pole, which is not a wooden pole, it's a concrete pole. And that the other lines, which are Comcast, AT&T's, or whoever's, remain there until they decide to move over the lines. And that's a communication that happens between those utilities and FPL. That's why when you drive down Celestial Way, you'll see that some of those wooden poles are actually cut at a specific height. They just cut them down. We have been in communication with FPL. I believe they already reached out to AT&T about trying to figure out when do they plan on moving the lines to the other concrete pole. But then that's something that AT&T, from what we heard, is that they don't have in their budget yet, and that they can't give us a date. But we're still going through our point of contact at FPL to try to get that date on when that will happen.
So for my edification, when the project was started with Florida Power and Light, and there were other major corporations, AT&T, whatever, were involved, there wasn't a project schedule for these other corporations to have their input to when they were going to do this?
They're all private companies.
I understand that,
Right.
but I'm talking about you as responsible, as staff, for managing this, to make sure that the quality of life in Juno Beach aesthetically would be done. Is it going to take 2 years? Is it going to take 6 months? Is it going to take 5 years?
I understand the question. Is just that, again, the town, my responsibility from the building side of things is that I cannot hold the permit up for, in case another private company does not wish to move their lines over. If I get a permit, I have to review it and I have to approve it if it meets our code and if it meets the Florida Building Code, which is what I did.
If I drive through Palm Beach, okay, or other communities, you don't see this.
AT&T is notoriously horribly slow about moving their lines.
Right.
Because we did it, they did in Hypalexo, they hardened, and it took AT&T about 8-9 months after FP&L had moved theirs to move their lines.
I know Frank has the best interest of Juno Beach at heart, and I would respect that he will come back and answer the question, when is it going to be done? Thank you,
Will
Frank.
do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Further comments from the board?
Yes, Michael. There's been a lot of talk recently about ecology, and we all know that this goes back a few years. It's important in the news. We've talked about sea level rise here at Planning and Zoning. Our natural areas are, of course, important to us. The quality of the lake water and our concern about the vegetation and the wildlife is something that's important. I'm curious in terms of my fellow members of the board here, what your personal interests are in the area of ecology, environment. Is it something that you like to read about? Are you passionate about it? If you wouldn't mind just going around and saying a word or two about your own feelings here on the issue and your own interest in the issue. Maybe Bob, you want to start?
I'm always interested in what surrounds me and how it affects me and my neighbors and the residents of the town.
But in terms of, is it the kind of thing you like to read about, Michael? Are you interested in the details about the science of it? And
Yeah, up to a point.
sure.
Jim, are you, to the point, are you talking about Pelican Lake to
Pelican Lake is certainly, it's been very visibly an issue in the past few months. Of course, we've seen all the vegetation there, and I think everybody here probably knows that there's been concern about wildlife there and matters like that, and what kind of chemicals should we use or should not use there. But these are things that, if we're going to go into our comprehensive plan, these are things that are going to be important in the background. We're not going to go into details about chemicals, I assume, but these are some broad issues that are going to be coming up. Bob, that's the reason I'm asking the question, to know, is this something that, well, how deeply do people here feel comfortable getting into it?
I think what we should be doing is hiring a professional who is trained in this topic, currently trained, has the right credentials, and I think the town should hire that person to look at the ecology of the lake and not ask a group of planning and zoning board members who were chosen not for that particular duty to try to be the ecological people. I think you need to hire the professional who has the credentials to do that job.
Carmen, what are your thoughts?
I agree with that. I agree with what Paul said, that there has to be somebody who knows what they're talking about and the experience to go ahead and study it for us.
And then I presume you would be happy reading that and be knowledgeable about the conclusions.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind reading about it, but I'm not the person to decide.
Bob, did you want to add something?
I totally agree. I think we've demonstrated this with what we've done with our respect for the turtles on Juno Beach, which is a global situation. We've networked with them and made Juno Beach a landmark site for preservation of turtles, and we should do the same thing with the preservation of our beautiful lake here. I mean, it is a landmark, and our lake flows into Seminole, and we shouldn't, I'm not an expert on any of this. And I think we should be dealing with the right people who have the right credentials to make sure that it's maintained properly. And it's that we are not doing things that are harmful, and to, just like we protect our citizens, we should be
But as
protecting the
Paul
environment.
said, this is not our duties. Now, I think it's important as background to help us, and as we deal with certain zoning issues, to be aware if ecology could affect that or not. But, you know, in terms of getting into the nitty gritty of this piece of parcel, that it's beyond our scope until the town council assigns it to us.
And Jim, yeah, I'll just give my 2 cents. Yes, I agree with council's decision and appreciate that Wednesday night, you know, that we will be hiring that environmental expert to consult on the best practice for managing the lake. But as far as the conservation element of the comprehensive plan goes, I agree that there needs some fine tuning in that section. I've looked at it extensively. And one thing that I noticed, it's one thing to sit with a document and sort of proofread it or just sort of look at it. But then when you're in the context of the situation, whether it's future land use or conservation or infrastructure, when you're in the meat of the issue, sometimes you go back to that comp plan and you look at it and you look at that particular policy a little bit differently in the throes of a situation that requires closer examination of that policy. So now that, you know, we have concerns about the lake, that might be an impetus to take a closer look at some of those conservation elements, policies, and see how they can be fine-tuned. And even if it means going back and fine-tuning other sections, you know, we have a lot of big building going on, and I don't know that that's happening in a conservation-minded way. I see some potential conflicts in what we're doing and what is stated on the page, and maybe we need to look a little closer at a few things.
So Didi, you'd favor moving kind of aggressively through the comprehensive plan review?
Aggressively meaning
Sense of not just
speed-wise?
putting it
No,
off for
no,
so
I don't think, I think this is while it's new and fresh and, you know, we should look at it now, you know, this summer. And if it takes 2 meetings a month to get through it, then we should do whatever it takes. But I don't think it should sit for another 10 years.
Yeah,
You know,
you're here.
there's a lot of change happening in the world, happening locally, a lot of things that need our attention, and that plan, you know, can help.
Yep. The rest of you agree, more or less, that we should be serious about getting through it?
I'm not sure how the comprehensive plan really goes to the ecological conditions of the lake.
Well,
Not just the lake.
There's a number
Because
of,
the plan is like a 25,000 foot level look at what you should be doing.
Sure. There's a whole chapter, though, for example, on conservation. And I think those are the kinds of things Didi's probably
yeah,
referring
and
to.
the elements that do mention specifically Pelican Lake, you know, I don't know that they're pertinent anymore, or that they need to be expanded. I have some things, but I'm not prepared to start reading them. But I can come back if we want to make it an agenda item to look at the conservation element, or I don't know the process for that evaluation. But there are some aspects of the Pelican Lake wording that I don't think are either as pertinent or that didn't have the forethought by the people who wrote it to address where we are today.
Parallel to that, I think there's a lot of areas where Pelican Lake is not included, where it should be considered.
That as well. I mean, I can try to find a section that would be illustrative of
My
that.
recollection is there are many references to the
There's
Pelican Lake.
references to it, but some of them aren't helpful.
Aren't
You know, I think that they
but
overlook
it-
the issues that we're struggling
But
with.
doesn't the lake also take all the runoff from the ridge? So
Always-
all the fertilizers that are used on the ridge, they go right into the lake.
Sure,
So
But that has nothing, well,
definitely, but those are all matters to look at, of
so
course.
you have to legislate that no one uses fertilizers anymore.
Well, Paul,
If that's going to run off into the lake or no more.
you're going to have to propose that, Paul, when the time comes.
I
Put it
think
on you,
this is
Paul,
just
to be
getting
the one to say
beyond what
that.
our scope is.
I know. That's why I didn't want to
Yeah.
take
Any other
task.
comments?
Okay, well, just to follow up a little bit further, Michael, I don't want to prolong this too long, but if we seem to be all on the same page that we're not experts in environmental science, and we're not the people who should take responsibility for doing environmental planning for the town, even though it does fall under our aegis that we are supposed to be looking at the comp plan specifically where it deals with conservation and coastal management and matters like this, which are part of planning and zoning. So we do have some responsibilities, but clearly we're going to need some expert advice. I think we're all on the same page there. Some of our neighboring towns have set up advisory panels where they have some members of these panels that are appointed by members of council, but they also bring in outside experts. For example, if I'm correct, Jupiter has 5 members who are appointed by council members, and then they have 4 scientists on there or similar types of experts to then discuss matters of concern to the town and then make recommendations to council for specific policies and actions. I'm wondering whether you think Juno Beach ought to consider doing something
Well,
like that.
that should be addressed to council.
Sure, I'm just wondering what your personal inclination is, Michael.
I think
idea,
this
bad
town
idea?
I think this town is too small to form an advisory group for that. And that's why I recommend that we go out and hire somebody who has all the credentials and let the staff listen to that person. You know, if we make an advisory council, they have to follow all the same rules that we do.
Sure.
All of a sudden now those people can't talk to one another.
Sure,
Every meeting has to be in public.
Mhm.
Every meeting has to be recorded,
good thing.
minutes.
Yeah, good thing.
So it's a big deal
Well, it is a big deal. That's why,
and it costs a lot of money.
of
I would-
course.
you know, that was, speaking of the money, that's something I have also asked Stuart or somebody to find out. You know, when Joe Lobello says that running a committee costs $10,000 a year, I'd like to see the numbers that back that up. As far as I know, we only have one other official committee, if that's true, the Landmarks Advisory Committee. And I would be curious to know how much it costs to run that committee in the past year, because don't know how staff gets paid.
Mhm.
The attorney isn't present at that meeting, so we don't have your salary to include. But how is that $10,000 figure surmised? And would an ecology advisory committee
If they
literally
want to-
cost
Why don't you
10,000?
write to him and ask him to respond?
Well, yeah.
I mean, think about it. If you meet
But-
once a month,
And isn't it worth it? You know, we've spent $30,000 on a fountain. We spend a lot of money, on other things, aren't we worth it?
Well, I think, again, it's not the scope of this board.
No, but
I mean,
just-
I
if you
think
have a question with
the best
that,
place to start is to
citizen-
hire that consultant.
well, we're doing that, yeah.
Paul, a town like Jupiter has 9 people on an advisory board. You think we should just have 1?
I think we should listen to our consultant.
I don't know that
The
that.
town of Juno Beach, the town of Jupiter is much larger. I mean,
Sure.
how many people are in Jupiter versus Juno?
No question.
And
But that
I
doesn't
mean-
rise to the level of an advisory board at any rate. Again, these are
I
matters
don't think
for
we
the
need
town
that.
council to get into and not through this board.
Well,
And
Jim's
then
asking.
we take, like it or not, we take our direction from them.
Of course, we know. Doesn't mean we can't discuss a matter like this, because it is going to be relevant to some degree when we look at our comprehensive plan. We're going to need expert advice.
They will see the minutes of this and they will be aware of the discussion.
Mhm.
I trust.
Most
Any
of
other
them are here.
comments from the board? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second that?
We are adjourned.
Good discussion.